Welcome to the deep dive. Some topics are just inherently complex, sensitive, and, let's be honest, often misunderstood. Our mission today is to cut through all that noise for you. We're diving deep into a whole stack of sources, articles, research, scholarly commentary to give you that shortcut,
Yeah.
to being truly well-informed. Today, we're going to tackle a critical subject, one that's often misrepresented: domestic violence in Muslim marriages. Our sources offer a really comprehensive look at Quranic interpretations, authentic Hadith, and Islamic scholarly commentary. We want to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight you need.
And it's so important we set the right tone here. This deep dive, it isn't about taking sides or, judging any community. It's really about understanding the nuances of religious texts, how they've been interpreted through history, and, well, how those interpretations interact with real-world issues. Domestic violence is a global problem. Of course, it affects every culture, every faith. But today, we'll be focusing specifically on the Islamic textual and interpretive landscape. It's quite unique.
That's a really crucial distinction. A good point. So let's start with the big picture, maybe. Domestic violence is this pervasive global issue. It crosses all societal lines, cultures, religions. Everyone knows that. Now, when you look at media narratives around Muslim communities, you might sometimes see suggestions of, say, a higher incidence among American Muslims, for instance. But our sources are pretty clear on this. The available data actually indicates that the rates are, well, comparable to the general U.S. population. What's truly striking, though, and where it gets really interesting, is this. Despite those comparable rates, domestic violence often tends to be more concealed within Muslim communities. Why is that? Well, our sources highlight some pretty significant barriers for women seeking help. This can include a strong cultural emphasis on keeping the family together, maintaining that unity at all costs. There's also pervasive stigma and shame around marital problems, and a very real fear of community rejection. And for immigrant women, you often find these additional fears, like deportation or losing custody of their children, which can make them feel incredibly vulnerable. So it suggests that the official statistics might actually be underrepresenting the true prevalence of the issue. Significantly, perhaps.
And that concealment points to something really important, a crucial dynamic. Perpetrators of violence in Muslim contexts often selectively pick and choose religious texts. They twist them, particularly one verse, Quran 4.34, and certain Hadith, to try and, justify their actions. These justifications are unfortunately deeply rooted in patriarchal interpretations that completely overlook the broader ethical worldview, the foundational principles of the Quran itself. And here's something powerful you should take away. A really substantial body of mainstream and progressive Islamic scholarship, along with prominent global Islamic organizations, unequivocally condemns domestic violence. They call it Zulm. That term Zulm, it means injustice, cruelty, oppression. It's a strong word. This immediately highlights a clear divergence, doesn't it, between the actions of some individuals and the overarching ethical framework of the faith. The problem, as our sources clearly show, lies not in Islam itself. It lies in the misinterpretation, the manipulation of its sacred texts. And this often gets tangled up with pre-existing cultural patriarchal norms. Islam fundamentally emphasizes marriage as a sacred institution. It's meant for peace, love, companionship. The Quran describes marriage as a way to find tranquility. It says God placed affection and mercy between spouses. Think about that affection and mercy. For tranquility. Spouses are even described beautifully as garments for each other. It symbolizes intimacy, mutual support, covering each other's weaknesses, And men are explicitly commanded to consort with your wives in a goodly manner, promoting patience and kindness. So our sources are very clear. Domestic violence in its various forms is unequivocally condemned as zulm, both in the Quran and in the Sunnah. That's the Prophet Muhammad's teachings and practices.
That really does set the ethical foundation, doesn't it? A strong foundation. Now let's zero in on the verse that's often right at the center of these discussions. Surah An-Nisa, verse 34, Quran 4.34. This verse is really central to talks about marital relations in Islam. A common translation reads something like this. Men are the protectors and maintainers of women because Allah has given the one more strength than the other and because they support them from their means. Therefore, the righteous women are devoutly obedient and guard in the husband's absence what Allah would have them guard. As to those women on whose part ye fear disloyalty and ill conduct, admonish them first. Next, refuse to share their beds, and last strike them. But if they return to obedience, seek not against them. Means of annoyance, for Allah is most high, great above you all. Okay. To truly understand how this verse has been interpreted and sometimes misinterpreted, we need to peel back its layers, starting right at the beginning. That first phrase often sets the tone.
Exactly. Let's start with men. Men are qawamun over women. That term, qawwamun, it's absolutely crucial. It's not just about authority in the way we might think. Its linguistic roots, they emphasize providing for, maintaining, attending to the affairs of others. Fundamentally, it links to responsibility. Financial provision is key. Now, traditionally, yeah, early scholars often interpreted qawwamun as, like, commanders or rulers. They connected it to male authority and even the right to discipline. However, there's been a significant shift. Contemporary interpretations, they really emphasize responsibility, protection, and financial maintenance. They see it more as a pure responsibility, pure liability, rather than, domineering authority. So what does this shift actually mean for you? Here's a really crucial insight, I think. If qawwamun is primarily about financial provision, then women's increasing economic independence in modern societies, well, it directly challenges that traditional basis for male authority derived just from this verse. This opens up important pathways for more egalitarian readings of Scripture, readings that emphasize shared responsibility, partnership, and marriage.
Okay, and the verse continues, because Allah has given some more than others, and because they support them from their means. What's that about?
Right. So 2 reasons are given here for men being designated as qawwamun. First, God's preference or advantage, called fadl. And second, financial support, or infaq. Traditionally, fadl was often interpreted as inherent male superiority, maybe in knowledge or strength. But contemporary scholars often view it differently, as a granted rank or perhaps a specific responsibility, not inherent moral or intellectual superiority. And the financial support aspect, in fact, that's universally understood as a clear responsibility, but it's obligatory and conditional. This is key. If a man fails financially, his qawwam role, well, it diminishes. This really shows how socio-economic realities influence interpretation, especially today.
Interesting. Then the verse mentions, and as for those women whose nushus you have reason to fear. What exactly is nushus in this context?
Nushus. It generally refers to disloyalty, ill conduct, maybe rebellion, or disobedience on the wife's part. Traditionally, this was often interpreted pretty broadly. It could even include things like refusing marital obligations. But here's where it gets really illuminating, I think. The Quran uses the identical term, nushuz, for male misconduct. That's in Quran 4.128. Yet, historically, pre-modern commentators interpreted male nushuz very differently, usually as things like hatred, cruelty, or sexual abandonment. There was generally no mention of disobedience when applied to men.
Wow, the same word.
The exact same word. And that difference in how it's understood, depending on whether it's applied to a man or a woman, well, it historically created a real power imbalance in marital discussions. Progressive scholars today are actively working to fix this. They argue for broadening female nushuz to mean only serious transgressions, or they advocate for applying similar standards to both genders, which makes sense, right?
It does. Okay, and then we arrive at the part that sparks the most contention, the most debate. Remind them, then leave them alone in bed, then hit them, that 3-step process.
Yes, these steps are definitely outlined as a conditional approach. And sequential. Striking, using the Arabic word daraba, is presented as the last resort. Only after the first 2 options, admonishment and separation in bed, have been tried and failed. And that term daraba, it is certainly the most contentious. Here's what's so maybe surprising about its interpretation, even historically. Many classical scholars, while they did interpret daraba as hit or strike, they imposed incredibly severe and consistent restrictions on it. Really strict. It had to be, they said, light, non-severe, without causing injury, without leaving a mark, not causing pain or disgrace, not breaking bones, and specifically avoiding the face and other sensitive areas. The permissible tools were limited to symbolic things, like a siwak, which is like a small natural toothbrush, or maybe a folded handkerchief, or just the palm of the hand. In fact, some really prominent classical scholars, like Imam Shafi'i, even found hitting reprehensible. They used the word makruh, or they said it was preferable not to do it at all.
So even back then, there was discomfort.
Exactly. It reveals this deep, long-standing ethical discomfort with physical harm. It's embedded right within Islamic scholarship itself. It's not just a modern reinterpretation. And because of this profound scholarly struggle, trying to reconcile a literal reading with the Quran's broader emphasis on kindness, mercy, justice, and the Prophet's example. Modern and progressive interpretations often propose alternative meanings for daraba altogether, completely different meanings. For instance, some interpret it as to leave the marital home, to move away, or to separate. They draw on other ways the word daraba is used in the Quran, like to travel. Others suggest it could mean to have intercourse, drawing from classical Arabic dictionaries and some Hadith, or even figurative meanings like to rescue or move away from danger, or maybe to set an example just to show how serious things are.
That's a huge range of meanings.
It is. It reflects a real scholarly effort. And crucially, the prophetic Sunnah, the prophet's own life, plays a vital role here. Despite the word daraba appearing in Quran 4.34, numerous Hadith, these reports of the prophet's life and sayings emphasize that Prophet Muhammad himself never struck any of his wives or his servants, ever. He explicitly condemned husbands who beat their wives. He said they are not the best among you. Clear condemnation. This strong, consistent prophetic example provides a powerful ethical counter-narrative. It strongly suggests the verse was intended, if anything, as symbolic or a highly restricted measure, certainly not a general license for physical punishment.
Right. And then the verse wraps up with, "And if thereupon they pay you heed, do not seek to harm them. Behold, God is indeed most high, great." What's the significance there?
That concluding clause is absolutely critical. It couldn't be clearer. It highlights unequivocally that the ultimate goal of this whole three-step process is reconciliation, restoring harmony, preserving the marriage bond, not punishment. Any action taken must be solely for reconciliation. And once that's achieved, any further annoyance or harm is strictly prohibited. This means prolonged abuse or actions taken out of anger or desire for control. They are explicitly outside the scope of what the verse permits. And that powerful final phrase, "Behold, God is indeed most high, great." It serves as this solemn warning, a reminder of divine accountability for any unjust or excessive treatment.
Okay, so the Quranic verse itself, when you really analyze it deeply, it reveals layers of nuance and a clear emphasis on reconciliation, not just punishment. But how does this textual interpretation actually come alive in practice? How should Muslims understand it day to day? For that, as you mentioned, we need to turn to the prophetic Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad's own life and teachings, which really serve as the ultimate ethical compass for Muslim marital conduct, right?
That's exactly right. The Prophet Muhammad's personal conduct is the ultimate benchmark. It's the ideal. Aisha, who was one of the Prophet's most beloved wives and incredibly knowledgeable, she narrated this. The Messenger of Allah never beat any of his servants or wives, and his hand never hit anything, period. This hadith, it establishes a foundational precedent, non-violence, that's the starting point. The Prophet also said, the most perfect of the believers in their belief are those with the best manners, and the best of you are those who are best with their wives. He directly links the perfection of your faith, your iman, to how you treat your spouse. It's that fundamental. And think about this. When women actually came to the Prophet complaining about being beaten by their husbands, he didn't brush it off. He responded with clear condemnation. He said, those husbands who take to beating their wives, are not the best among you. It's a direct rebuke. He also directly commanded, do not beat Allah's handmaidens. Handmaidens meaning women, servants of God. He even posed this rhetorical question that really makes you pause and think. Could any of you beat your wife as he would a slave and then lie with her in the evening? It powerfully highlights the moral reprehensibility of such acts, especially within the intimate bond of marriage. And he declared a universal principle. If anyone harms others, Allah will harm him. That's a serious warning. Now, you might find some hadith that, in line with Quran 4.34, do mention hitting in the context of new shoes, but they consistently stipulate without causing injury or leaving a mark, which again reinforces that symbolic intent we talked about. For example, Ibn Abbas, a highly respected early Islamic scholar, he interpreted light hitting in this context as using a siwak, that little toothbrush stick. It's symbolic, not harmful. So if we connect all this to the bigger picture, what you see is this fascinating tension, a tension between the ideal, the Prophet's own absolute nonviolence, and what might be considered legally permissible under extremely narrow, very specific conditions. So while something might be technically allowed under those super restrictive conditions like that symbolic tap with the siwak, it is clearly not the encouraged behavior. It's certainly not the prophetic ideal. The Prophet's own actions, his explicit condemnations, they guide believers.
That's such a profound distinction, isn't it? It's almost, well, jarring to hear that direct example of the Prophet's conduct, especially when you compare it with some common misconceptions out there. It really makes you consider what ideal truly means in practice. So let's move towards the present day. How do contemporary scholars, today's leading Islamic authorities, view all this? Because this isn't just about ancient texts being reinterpreted in some academic vacuum.
You're absolutely right. It's not a vacuum at all. There is a broad, really undeniable consensus among Islamic scholars and major organizations today. They unequivocally condemn domestic violence as zulm, as injustice, full stop. For example, you have the British Fatwa Council explicitly stating that abusive behavior is never acceptable. Simple as that. The International Islamic Fiqh Academy, which is a major global body of scholars, they define domestic violence broadly. They say it's any hurtful and harsh words or deeds causing bodily or moral injury, and they deem it prohibited behavior. Why? Because it directly contradicts the core objectives of Sharia, Islamic law. Objectives like protecting life, mind, religion, property, and the family itself. And look at Egypt's Dar al-Ifta, another leading authority. They emphasize that in modern society, clinging to outdated notions of disciplining women through violence is just illogical. It's inappropriate. They assert that even minimal force is a violation, and they strongly recommend Muslim men use other options for marital disagreements. They explicitly state that refraining from any form of striking is actually closer to Allah's true meaning, to the spirit of the Quran. Across the board, the prophetic example is consistently upheld as the ideal. Spousal abuse is totally rejected in Islam. That's the message.
That's very clear. So the religious scholarship seems overwhelmingly against violence.
Yes. But then, this leads us to an important question, doesn't it? How do sociological factors, cultural factors, intersect with these religious interpretations? Because the reality on the ground can be complex. Our sources tell us that while domestic violence isn't unique to Muslim communities, of course, it is influenced by specific cultural and migratory factors, especially for Muslim women. Things like language barriers, social isolation, maybe lack of financial resources, fears related to immigration status or child custody. These can create huge additional barriers for women trying to seek help. And then you have collectivist cultural values. These often prioritize family unity and reputation above almost everything else, which can make it incredibly difficult for women to leave abusive relationships because they fear community rejection or bringing shame on the family. And sadly, yes, patriarchal interpretations, sometimes reinforced by religious leaders who maybe aren't fully aware or trained on these nuances, they can contribute to women feeling they have to accept violence. And perpetrators, as we said, often distort religious ideas to rationalize their behavior. Sociologists also note that violence is often a learned behavior tied into unequal gender power dynamics. So all of this just underlines the need for really nuanced, culturally appropriate support services. And cultural humility from service providers is essential to truly address the issue effectively. You have to understand the context.
That brings so many layers of complexity to light. It's not just about the text, is it? It's about culture, society, individual circumstances. So let's try to tie all of this together for you, our listener. What are the key takeaways from this deep dive into a really important and often heavy topic? Okay, first, domestic violence among Muslims is not inherent to Islam. That's crucial. Instead, it stems from misinterpretations of its sacred texts, which often get tangled up with pre-existing patriarchal cultural norms. Second, the overwhelming weight of Islamic scholarship, both classical and contemporary, unequivocally condemns domestic violence. They label it Zulm, an injustice. Third, Islamic marriage is fundamentally founded on love, mercy, and mutual respect. Remember that beautiful description of spouses as garments for each other. That's the foundation. Fourth, Quran 4.34, when you understand it properly in its full context, outlines a last resort process, and it's aimed squarely at reconciliation, not punishment. And that controversial strike interpretation. It's either severely restricted to symbolic, non-injurious gestures by classical scholars, or it's entirely reinterpreted away from any form of harm by many, many contemporary scholars. And finally, perhaps most importantly, the Prophet's Sunnah. His own exemplary nonviolent conduct, his clear condemnations of abuse that serves as the primary ethical compass, this sets an ideal that goes far beyond mere legal permissibility. It guides Muslims towards truly compassionate, just marital relations.
Exactly. And ultimately, addressing this issue effectively, well, it requires promoting sound religious literacy that highlights these nuanced interpretations we've discussed. It means actively challenging harmful cultural practices that might persist even if they contradict the core teachings. And it certainly means strengthening support systems that empower women, provide safe options, and hold perpetrators accountable for their actions. All of this has to be done within a framework that upholds the core Islamic values we've talked about: justice, compassion, and fundamental human dignity for everyone.
That's a powerful summary. So here's a final thought for you to consider, maybe explore on your own after this deep dive. Considering that profound emphasis on love, mercy, and justice in the core Islamic teachings, how might understanding these nuanced interpretations empower individuals and communities? How might it help build truly tranquil, equitable relationships, not just within marriage, but maybe even beyond it? Something to think about.